So I went back to jw.org to continue exploring this new religion that I had left decades ago. And I saw this article, Fulfilling Your Role as a Parent. Now, this just brings up all kinds of emotions and thoughts because I don't think being a JW sets you up to be a good parent. As we all know, thanks to a lot of activism and cases coming up in different countries, the Jehovah's Witnesses are prolific in having family members shun each other, including parents shunning children, never speaking to them, sometimes for the rest of their lives. Is there any greater testament to failure as a parent when you shun your child because your religion tells you to? Because of that child choosing another faith or choosing no faith, basically because the child disagrees with your religion. Or for the child making mistakes or learning, which is a process that we all go through, which sometimes means getting into romantic relationships when they're older and maybe making mistakes. And for that, they pay for the rest of their lives by being cut off from their parents and from the rest of the society that they grew up as a part of. And I think this article helps to understand the process that goes on in the mind of a parent that does this kind of thing. So they go on to say that in order to fulfill your role as a parent, the main points are to, number 1, clearly state your values, 2, help your child understand consequences, and 3, build positive traits. Now that sounds fine on the surface. Some things that I noticed clearly lacking in this article was listen. There's absolutely nothing about listening to your child. Love. And is it any wonder when a member of the governing body, the highest echelon of the organization, says that children are enemies of God? Actually, babies are enemies of God, is what he said.
Sometimes you'll hear people say of a little baby, "Look at that little angel." But more accurate would be to say, "Look at that little enemy of God."
What the
Now, of course, we love that little baby.
So you're being primed to see this baby as something evil that has to be corrected and set straight, as opposed to a gift that you should love and teach, not just to follow a set of values and understand consequences, but also how to navigate the world, to have critical thinking, to have self-confidence, always strive for and demand better for themselves. So the first point, clearly state your values, says, as children grow, they are buried in an avalanche of misinformation about morals from their peers, and that research shows that when it comes to major decisions in life, many adolescents place higher value on their parents' viewpoints. So they bring up Deuteronomy 6, verse 6 and 7, in order for parents to inculcate upright values in their kids. This is a blanket statement, which makes it seem that just because you're a Jehovah's Witness, that your values are good and that you should inculcate your child with them. What about the parents that don't have good values? And yes, there are many of them in the organization. What about the child molesters? Or the parents that enable or allow this kind of abuse to continue in the organization? What about the parents making sure that they make martyrs of their children by asking doctors not to give them life-saving blood transfusions? And the shunning, is that a value that you should inculcate in children? Well, obviously we see the results. Children themselves shun their parents that choose to leave the organization or that are disfellowshipped. Just go into YouTube and look for stories from former Jehovah's Witnesses, and there are countless cases where parents have raised their children in the organization only to be shunned by them when they started questioning the teachings. And those cases are successes in the eyes of the organization because then those children have been inculcated, putting the organization first above their parents. So on the surface, it is right to say that parents should clearly state their values so that their children have boundaries. But as a Jehovah's Witness, those values are questionable. And they can change from one day to the next. If the governing body came out and said that blood transfusions are now allowed, in spite of which fractions they may be, then all those parents that martyred their children or have inculcated in them to choose death over a life-saving blood transfusion will suddenly change their tune to fall in step with the organization, which means that their values were wrong all along. That's how it can go if you are a follower of men. The article goes on to say, help your child understand consequences. And it says, use real-life examples to explain to your child how those who adopted a wrong course suffered, or how those who did the right thing benefited. I found it amusing that they use the verse in Luke 17:31 and 32. And in particular, verse 32 that says, remember the wife of Lot. Oh yes, children, remember. The woman who simply glanced behind to see the fire and brimstone burning up their home, and she got turned into a pillar of salt. Unlike her exemplary husband, Lot, who we know did atrocious things, like give his daughters to a horde of men so that they could be sexually assaulted. Not to mention that he himself sexually assaulted his daughters. But no, remember the wife of Lot. Don't be like her. What a strange example to use to teach children consequences of their actions. If anything, I would say this example teaches them that if you're a man, you can get away with horrible things and still supposedly be seen as good by God. And then they use Hebrews 13:7, which says, remember those who are taking the lead among you, who have spoken the word of God to you. As you contemplate how their conduct turns out, imitate their faith. Never miss a chance to sneak in a bit of indoctrination to make sure children learn to follow the leadership in the organization, whether that be elders or the governing body. And the article goes on to say, do not shield your child from the consequences of his or her own mistakes. Once again, a universal message that even non-Jehovah's Witnesses teach their children, but it has somewhat of a chilling effect coming from an organization that has a very disproportionate level of punishment for perceived wrongdoings, where their judicial committees are used as a sledgehammer to crack down on members, and in many cases young members of the congregation, for making simple human mistakes that can be rectified with more loving means. The next point about building positive traits, again, seemingly not harmful. The problem is the messenger carrying this message. They quote the book of Proverbs 20:11, which says the children show what they are by what they do. You can tell if they are honest and good. Once again, a book written a long time ago in light of the fact that our view of childhood and child rearing evolves over time as we learn more about human nature through psychology and other sciences. I take issue with categorizing children as bad or good, especially when that affects how we treat them. Writing a child off as bad leads to often reinforcing that behavior in them, instead of helping them to learn new ways to deal with situations so they can grow up to handle those situations better. And more importantly, to have a positive self-esteem instead of thinking that they're a bad seed and beyond help. And here you see the organization's culture of stripping off the old personality and clothing yourself with a new personality, which they take from Colossians 3. This is where you learn to become the sort of Stepford wife or AI robot that behaves a certain way, dresses a certain way, and talks a certain way in order to fit into the group and what is considered to be a spiritually strong Jehovah's Witness. And so after making it clear that parents have this duty to make sure that the children envision what it is that they want to be as a person, which is the perfect Jehovah's Witness, and to put on that new personality, basically put on the mask and behave the way you know that you're supposed to in order to fit into this group, whether that's heartfelt or not. The article then goes on to quote 1 Corinthians 10:11, talking about the end of the system of things. Nothing like a bit of fear-mongering using Armageddon as a scare tactic. You be a good company boy or girl, or you get destroyed. Nothing like a threat of death to help in your child rearing. The article goes on to recommend the My Book of Bible Stories, and we all know what kind of book that is, at least for those of us that grew up as children in the organization. Lots of fear and doom and gloom and fire and hailstones in not just the stories, but also in the depictions and the pictures. Again, an article about your role as a parent, completely devoid of anything that has to do with loving your children, encouraging them, building up their self-esteem and confidence. And this coming from an organization that leaves parents very ill-equipped to help their children navigate challenges that come as they get older, where daring to not follow the indoctrination leads to disproportionately heavy punishments, rather, even as harsh as never being able to speak to your parents or rely on them for help till you go through penance and fall back in line. And we know, again, through a lot of stories that are told by ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, you can find them everywhere on YouTube, that even some children or teenagers who come back to the organization after being disfellowshipped are never treated the same way again, not shown love by their parents, still continue to be shunned or seen as bad association or spiritually weak. While this article and the general culture in the organization is one where you catch children being bad, being enemies of God, or doing things that you can just write them off as bad or good for, a good parent has nuances and looks for when the child does good in order to praise them, to build them up. And more importantly, being flexible so as to adjust to life events or to the child's situation, personality, challenges that they might be facing. I maybe had a picture of what I would be like as a parent before having a child, but that had to completely give way to the changing circumstances over the different phases of childhood. And to me, being open to learning not just how to be a good parent, but also learning from my child. And because I no longer live for a future time, thinking that this life is just in waiting for a paradise earth to come, that means that I also want to enjoy this life with my child. And the idea of punishing both myself and my child by never speaking to them again just because they didn't follow the rules of an organization I happen to be a part of doesn't seem like enjoying life at all. It's not healthy, it's harmful, and it's a course of action that I'm sure many Jehovah's Witnesses regret on their deathbed when they don't have their children around them. And when they realize that the end of this system of things, as they like to say, didn't come in their lifetime, and that they followed the wrong leaders and the wrong teachings about how to be a good parent. And in conclusion, I find that it's quite ironic to take parenting advice from a group of people that mostly doesn't have children. As far as I know, in the governing body, it isn't that many of them that have children at all. This being in an organization where it has historically been discouraged to have children at all because the end is coming. So just make sure that you concentrate on preaching, helping in the building work with your free labor, giving your money to the organization. I mean, children are expensive. And with a very high rate of grown children leaving the organization as soon as they are independent. There are so many resources out there today and so many parenting lessons that have been gleaned from research. There is absolutely no excuse for taking parenting guidelines from a bunch of charlatans. And with that, have a nice rest of your day.
Look at me sometimes like all you want to do is run.